So look at Anthony Ryder from South Lyon, Michigan, recently selected as the Lions 2020 Fan of the Year. He has a passion about sports broadcasting.
With the 112th selection in the 2021 NFL Draft, the Detroit Lions select Amon-Ra St. Brown, wide receiver, USC. One pride, baby! Yeah! Brad Holmes and the Detroit Lions had a busy week of free agency, and this past weekend was no exception. Going into the weekend with $27 million to spend, Brad Holmes decided to fill out the remainder of this roster, fill up the remaining holes that the roster has, and be able to go into the draft with the ability and the expectation to draft the best player available at every single selection. And I think the Lions now have the ability to do just that. After a massive signing on Monday morning, as well as a massive signing on Thursday night, the Detroit Lions have filled arguably their two biggest needs this offseason in the later stages of free agency for pretty much a bargain deal. And the Lions have made a couple of other re-signings and a couple other small moves to improve the roster as well. So today, I wanted to take a look at the moves that the Detroit Lions made, take a look at the news and the coherent rumors of the Detroit Lions, and take a look at what they've done to improve the roster, take a look at what they're potentially going to do to improve the roster, and just overall take a look at the state of the Lions after a busy couple of days. So with all of that being said, let's get into the biggest news of the weekend, arguably, and that being the Detroit Lions signing the best nose tackle on the market this year, with DJ Reader signing a 2-year, $21 million contract with the Detroit Lions that is relatively backloaded to give the Detroit Lions a lot of flexibility this year with the cap. DJ Reader's cap hit this season is only $5.3 million. However, that does jump to 12.1 going into year two, where the Detroit Lions have a lot more money and they have a lot more flexibility. DJ Reader, again, was the best defensive tackle on the market, and really for the entire week of free agency, we talked about this guy being a Detroit Lion. We talked about bringing in the best nose tackle, allowing him to be the nose tackle, which would allow Liam McNeil to kick out to more of a three-tech role, more of a pass rushing situation, and in turn, making both positions better. I think that the 2-year, $21 million contract is a really good value for DJ Reader. Again, the best player at his position, making annually and on average about $10 million a season, seems like an absolute steal for the Detroit Lions. And for most people, their number one target this year for the Lions was DJ Reader, was to fill up that defensive line, was to fix and improve that defensive line. And I think DJ Reader does just that. He'll eat up double teams. He's going to get pressure consistently. He's going to improve an already elite run defense. And I think he's going to open up opportunities for Aiden Hutchinson. I think he's going to open up a lot of opportunities for Liam McNeil, potentially for the next edge rusher that the Detroit Lions draft in the NFL draft. But with that being said, that's not the only move that the Detroit Lions made this week, and it's not the only thing that the Lions did to improve the roster, as early in the weekend, the Lions had some breaking news as newly acquired cornerback one Carlton Davis ended up taking a pay cut, bringing his salary cap hit from a $14.5 million cap hit all the way down to a $9.8 million cap hit. Now, this is not necessarily something that most people expected. Obviously, with him just being acquired from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in a massive trade, Carlton Davis has a lot of the leverage in this situation, right? There's not a whole lot the Lions can do if they say, hey, can you take a pay cut to let us go sign this guy? And if Carlton Davis says no, you don't really have a choice, right? You have to pay him that money because you just traded for him. You can't cut him. You can't trade him away again. You just acquired him from a third-round pick. He has all the leverage, and yet still decided to take a pay cut, and a pretty significant pay cut, taking over 30% of his salary and pushing it and essentially giving it up and forfeiting it for the good of the team. Now, this tells me that, Carlton Davis, first off, is a team player, obviously, but also that he probably sees a future in Detroit past just this season, right? I don't think you take this massive pay cut unless you expect to be back and make that money back later on down the line, right? I think Carlton Davis is a smart guy, obviously. He is an NFL player. He works with these contracts all the time. You don't give up 33% of your contract if you don't expect to return, if you don't expect the benefit in return. And I think that instead of squeezing every last penny out of the Detroit Lions for a 1-year stint and then going on to get a big haul and a big contract in free agency, I think this speaks volumes to, one, the culture that the Lions have, and two, just the team player that Carlton Davis is, and I think is a good sign for things to come in the future. So with that $5 million cleared up, what did the Detroit Lions do? Well, they decided to go out and, on the 6th, 7th, 10th day of free agency, they just decided to go out and get the best guard on the market. Kevin Zeitler on a 1-year, $6 million contract, which again, including the $5 million that they saved from Carlton Davis, basically means that the Detroit Lions signed Kevin Zeitler for 1 year, $1 million, which is just, unbelievable if you think about it in that way. And Kevin Zeitler is a phenomenal player, despite being relatively old, despite being on the older end of the offensive line and the older end of NFL players. Kevin Zeitler last year played in 982 snaps for Baltimore, had 2 sacks allowed, and a 69.3 Pro Football Focus grade. That is a better PFF grade than Jonah Jackson last season. That is the same amount of sacks that Jonah allowed last season in more games and more snaps played, while being $16 million cheaper for the Detroit Lions. Now, Kevin Zeitler is a pure right guard. He's played right guards for all 9 years of his NFL career, which, by the way, in each of those 9 years, Kevin Zeitler has played at least 15 games in every single one. Kevin Zeitler is healthy. Kevin Zeitler is consistently on the field and consistently a Pro Bowl caliber guard. But with that being said, he is going to take over the right guard position, meaning that Graham Glasgow is going to have to transition, meaning really the Lions aren't adding just one player to the offensive line, but they're shifting around 2 different positions, with the offensive line most likely next season looking like Taylor Decker, Graham Glasgow at the left guard, Frank Ragnow at the center, Kevin Zeitler at the right guard, and of course Penei Sewell at the right tackle. Now, luckily for the Detroit Lions, Graham Glasgow has experience at all 3 positions, as for the first 4 years in Detroit, he was a left guard. He went to Denver and transitioned to right guard. He's played backup center. He's played both guard positions on both sides of the offensive line. He is really a universal tool for the Detroit Lions to use, and I don't think we're going to see any fall off of production from a left guard to a right guard switch. So with that being said, I think this is a phenomenal move for the Detroit Lions. I think going from the best offensive line in 2023 to getting better in 2024 is something that not a lot of people expected out of the Detroit Lions. A lot of people were sad to see Jonah Jackson go. This is not a long-term 10-year move, but it is a 1-year band-aid. It is an opportunity for the Detroit Lions to stay elite on the offensive line while drafting a replacement, while building up the depth of that offensive line, and potentially drafting a player in the first 2 to 3 rounds to develop over a year and take over for Kevin Zeitler when he officially retires. But for the time being, the Lions offensive line not only stays elite, but it actually ended up getting better. Now, a couple smaller moves from this weekend include Donovan Peoples-Jones returning to the Detroit Lions for a 1-year, $2 million contract, as well as Scott Daly returning to the Detroit Lions. I do not have the contract information for that yet, but he is returning, I believe, for at least 1 more season, potentially a multi-year deal, to return as the Detroit Lions starting long snapper. Now, Scott Daly did not finish the 2023 season, as he unfortunately had a season-ending injury, but he has been the long snapper over the last couple of years for the Detroit Lions, and I believe for the entire tenure of Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell. He returns. He is already 30 years old, so he is getting up there, but long snappers tend to play into their late 30s, if not early 40s, so he's still got a long time to go. Now, with all that being said, the Detroit Lions, I think, have addressed all of their biggest needs over the last couple of days. DJ Reader ends up becoming the #1 defensive tackle on the Lions. Kevin Zeitler turns into a starting right guard for the Detroit Lions. And even with Donovan Peoples-Jones returning, now they have their ex-wide receiver, a 6'2", 4'4" speed field stretcher that can go up and get the jump ball, that can go up and be really good through the air, and can be the ex-wide receiver that the Lions have been lacking for a long, long time. So with that being said, what could the rumors possibly be? Well, obviously, there's a lot of rumors in the draft talking about the Lions potentially taking a wide receiver 1 or potentially taking a guard. But really, the rumors that we've seen recently have been in regards to some remaining free agents and potentially with the Detroit Lions addressing their wide receiver 1 need. Even with Donovan Peoples-Jones returning to the Detroit Lions lineup, I don't think wide receiver 1 is necessarily booked up, and I don't think that X wide receiver is necessarily a sure thing. And with Michael Thomas and and both Stephon Diggs being on the block and potentially being trade or signee candidates, of course, there's going to be people saying, hey, the Detroit Lions need an X wide receiver. Why not go sign Michael Thomas? Or the Detroit Lions need a number one wide receiver. Why not trade for Stephon Diggs, who seems to be on the out with the Buffalo Bills? I don't think either one of those is particularly likely. I would bet against both of them if those were the odds. Like Michael Thomas is a player that hasn't been healthy for over 5 seasons, hasn't played a complete season in over half a decade. And while he's a pretty good player on the field, he's very rarely on the field. And I don't think the Lions are going to sign that player in a year where they need production and they need to win. Stephon Diggs, again, is an older wide receiver. I don't think is going to, first off, want to be in Detroit. He is used to having a quarterback with a big arm that can stretch the field, and I don't think Jared Goff is Josh Allen. And I just don't think he fits necessarily the scheme. I don't think the Lions want the diva. I don't think they want the, attention-seeking wide receiver. And I truly don't believe Stephon Diggs is on the market at all for the Detroit Lions. The only other rumor that I've really seen is, of course, the Stephon Gilmore rumors. With his cousin being a member of the Detroit Lions secondary already, there is, of course, that family connection, as well as with the Detroit Lions having $21 million still left to spend. They could potentially go out and get Stephon Gilmore to be the cornerback 2, meaning you could put Cam Sutton at cornerback 3, meaning you could put Brian Branch at the safety position and kind of as a rotational guy and really truly have potentially 2 cornerback 1s as well as a great slot cornerback, as well as 3 cornerbacks, or as well as 3 safeties in the deep safety role. There's a lot of potential there. But I think if the Detroit Lions were going to go out and sign Stephon Gilmore, they would have already done so. The only way I see this really coming to fruition is if Stephon Gilmore really has no market and is going to sign for, a really cheap $5-6 million deal for a 1 year, potentially chasing that final ring. He was good last year for Dallas. Don't get me wrong. I think he can still start in the secondary. I think he can still start in pretty much any secondary in the NFL. But I think for an older player on a market for cornerbacks that's pretty much been depleted and pretty much been drained in a draft process with a lot of great cornerbacks, I think Stephon Gilmore's value could potentially be at an all-time low, which means Brad Holmes could potentially get a good value out of it and also could potentially add to the secondary. But I think it'd have to be a really cheap deal. It'd have to be a really great value for Brad Holmes to consider it. But it's not officially off the table in the way that Thomas and Diggs are. So with all of that being said, those are the news and rumors for this week. The Lions addressed their biggest needs of guard, defensive tackle, and X wide receiver. And now, again, really go into the draft with no major needs. They have no major flaws on the offense. And I think even if you would skip the draft entirely, I think even if the Lions don't draft a single player this year, they're still very much in contention to repeat as NFC North champs, to repeat their appearance to the NFC Championship game, and potentially be the favorites in the NFC to go to the Super Bowl. So with all of that being said, that's all I got for you guys right now. A big week for the Detroit Lions and a big week for a lot of players. Let me know down in the comments below how you grade free agency so far. I'd be very curious what you guys have to say and what rumors you hope maybe are potentially true. Very curious to hear what you guys have to say down in the comments below. But with all of that being said, that's all I got for you guys right now. Thank you all so very much for watching. And until next time, and as always, go Lions.